I want to say just a word about One Minneapolis and why the Minneapolis Foundation got engaged with this effort. Many of you know that the Minneapolis Foundation, in the last couple of years, initiated a new strategic plan, 2009 to 2015, focused on creating equity, promoting social, racial, and economic equity, as many people talk about it as evening the playing field. And this was a bold act for our board. And as we took on that work, we really wanted to be grounded in the data, specifically in the city of Minneapolis, and understanding more what was working, what wasn't working, who was on the track for prosperity and who was not. And that really led us to a partnership with Wilder. And so I just invite you to close your eyes and think about the vision of One Minneapolis. And it could be your community. It could be one Apple Valley, one Brainerd, one Duluth, one Rochester, wherever you are. And what if every child started school ready to learn? What if every child was reading by the end of third grade? What if every child graduated from high school on time? What if every adult was fully employed? That's the vision behind One Minneapolis. And what if the outcome, what if your ability to achieve these goals was not predefined by your race or your ethnicity? And so the challenge in Minnesota is we don't talk about race. And this One Minneapolis is really about truth telling. It's about telling what's going on in our community for everyone, not looking at the averages, but really looking at the individual experiences of members in our community. And so that's really what's driving our interest in One Minneapolis. And it was not created to be a data report. And those of you that know me know I'm not the data wonk. It really was created to be a tool for action. And so the reasons that we engaged in this, as I've mentioned, are many, but among them is really creating a common language for how we can talk about this issue. And as many efforts around our community are popping up, we're hearing a lot about, collective impact, and having common data and common language about how we talk about the problem is really critical. We also created this report to be a wake-up call to our community. So, here I talk about as motivating additional stakeholders, but it really is to say, community, wake up, look at how we're doing, and let's work together to create an action plan. It really is about focusing and targeting our resources in significant ways and about creating an agenda for change. So we really work to create One Minneapolis as a tool to realize the vision. We're not interested in talking only about the problem anymore. We want to be able to stand up and say that we've actually been able to create change. So you've seen a lot of data today, but this is what was relevant for the Minneapolis Foundation staff and board as we looked at the city of Minneapolis. And I have to say, though I walk down the streets of Minneapolis every day and I'm a resident of the city, to see that 40% of Minneapolis residents are now people of color was a number that I was personally not carrying around in my head. I do know that when I came to Minnesota in 1992, things looked very different than they did then. But to know that 40%, 4 out of every 10 Minneapolis residents are people of color, that should be driving a lot of our understanding about the issue. And so we have to consider the significance of the disparities that we're experiencing in the city of Minneapolis, given that we're talking about 40% of the population. And there are many people that are reflected in these numbers, behind every one of these numbers as an individual. So I'm not going to go through the One Minneapolis report. You all have it at your places. But just to give you a sense of how the report is organized, you'll see that in the report, you'll see ranges that show how the lowest performing group and the highest performing group are doing on any one of the indicators. And you will see that the gap is the span of the range in percentage points. And there are huge gaps in this report. The risk is the severity of the gap by the size of the gap. And then you'll see overall the indicator. So often we talk, for example, in the area of school readiness, which is one of the areas that I have particular interest in the area of early childhood, we'll often talk about, well, 70% of the kids in Minneapolis are ready for school. But when we look deeper at the data, we can see that the range is actually 36 to 94%. And of course, who do you guess is at the 94% level? The white kids. And at 36%, those are Hispanic kids in the city of Minneapolis. So in order to use this really as a tool for action, we have to really get beneath the averages to really look at how individual groups of students are doing. And the data can be very telling about what's happening in our community, but we also hope that it really drives the development of an action plan. So here's the call to action at a very high level. One is we have to be incredibly strategic. We have to focus on and invest in what works. I have to say, I love all the talk about innovation and new ideas, but I think we also miss the opportunity to acknowledge that there are some things in our community that are working. And how much time, if we're spending as much time vetting the stadium sites, let's spend that same amount of time figuring out what's working in our community for specific groups of kids. I have to say I'm the only girl in my house, and we do bleed purple in my house, so I'm all for that. But really understanding what's working, investing in upstream high return strategies. And we know, for example, in Minneapolis, things like Way to Grow are getting kids ready for school. We know that charter schools like Harvest Prep and Hiawatha Academy are closing the achievement gap for kids of color. We know that programs like Genesis Works that helps place kids in Fortune 500 companies, that when those kids go on to college, and they are at very high rates, almost 100% of the kids are going on to college, something there is working. We know that programs like the Network for Good that are taking ex-offenders and putting them to work, something's working. So yes, we need innovation and new ideas, but we also need to look what's working for these individual communities of color that are not faring well in our community. Another example in this area is the whole area of early childhood, and I can't not speak to this issue. There's nothing we don't know about early childhood, is there? We know that it works, and yet our state has not invested to the level that we need to invest to close the access gap. If we as a community rallied only around that one point, we could change the trajectory of our entire state. And we have some great opportunities with the Race to the Top dollars and with other things that are coming into place, but we have to be focused and strategic. And so we have to be intentional. We have to really ask the question with every strategy that we embrace, will this close the gap? And do we have any proof? Do we have any evidence? Do we have an inkling that this could work? Because if it's not going to close the gap, we need to stop investing in it. And I say that as a funder who, frankly, sometimes we're part of the problem. We have to change our behavior based on the data in reports like OneMinneapolis. And then we have to be inclusive, and this is a part that I have not heard anybody talk about. We don't have all the answers in this room, but many of the people in the communities that are most affected could tell you a lot about what would change their life trajectory. And we need to be creating different tables that include not only the policymakers and the funders, but people who are most affected by the issue. They can tell us a lot. We need to be outspoken, and I would even go so far as to say we need to be outraged. To look at this data year after year after year after year and to not change our actions is unacceptable. We know a lot of what works, and in the areas where we don't, we have to be investing in and looking for those opportunities. But we have to really be willing to talk about, we have to be willing to talk about race at every table where we sit, our kitchen tables, our houses of worship, and our workplaces, everywhere that we are, to use this data to be action-oriented. And finally, we have to be relentless. We cannot give up. We've already heard all the data. There's too much at stake here for us not to stay at this. And I love one of my favorite quotes from Nelson Mandela. He said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And so we can work together as a community to get this done. One Minneapolis is one example of an effort that starts to move us towards a common agenda.